Good evening, everybody. Am I on? Let's see. How's the volume out there? Is it okay? All right. Am I turned on? Check, check. Test, test. There we go. Sweet. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jeff Ream. I am one of the counselors here at NorthTahoe High School. And I just want to say welcome to our campus. And whether or not you are a family of a senior or potentially even a family of an 8th grader, we sent some invites out to our NorthTahoe School friends. We're going to spend a little time this evening in 2 different sessions talking about a big thing called financial aid. And I want to kind of set a couple precedents. I want to set a couple expectations in that. So I'm going to turn some lights on so you can see me. We're going to be starting big picture in our first session, kind of going over some of the basics that are required for getting prepared and filing your financial aid different applications, how financial aid functions, some of the different opportunities we have to support attending school or education or training after high school in a lot of different paths. When we talk about financial aid, it's not just four-year college, it's community college, it's trade or technical schools, and there are a lot of opportunities for families to be able to gain money. So we're going to start a little bit broad, and we're going to get up there into the more nitty-gritty stuff in about a half hour, 40 minutes. The second half of our time tonight will be spent primarily with our lower grades in this room, and then we'll have some support folks upstairs for seniors who are interested in actually completing some of the forms that are required, called the FAFSA, or the California DREAM Act. And so at that point, we'll take a break, a short kind of intermission. Families that are interested in going and getting some support, really our seniors, can head upstairs, and I'll give you some directions later, to get some great help and actually get your applications filed here tonight so that you're done and ready to rock and roll. Okay. The rest of the group will stay with me if you care to learn a little bit more about the intricacies of financial aid, a couple ways to position students who are a little bit younger, usually 9th, 10th, and even into 11th grade, has some opportunities to potentially work a little bit ahead and get prepared for some of the steps regarding financial aid. One note that I do want to kind of highlight is that I am not a financial professional. Okay, I'm not here to give you financial advice. I can't really get into the financial aspects of like how you manage your money, where you should move money, things like that. That is something that's best suited for a financial advisor, a tax professional, someone who's much more in the know of all the different rules and regulations so that you don't find yourself in hot water. There are some kind of grayish area ways, or maybe more advanced ways to maybe move money around or shelter certain types of money that I can't really give you advice on. But if you're early in this process, it might be worthwhile to talk to a family advisor or a tax professional related to some of that stuff. Tonight, like I mentioned, we're going to spend our first little bit painting the picture and building a foundation of what financial aid actually is, how it functions in the world of college, and how you kind of go about accessing it. In the second half, we'll dive into more of how do we figure out how much college it costs, how do we understand ways to maybe improve merit aid offers, and pieces of information along that way. So there's 4 key areas that people access when they're paying for college. Okay, the building blocks of funding for schools. And so you can see them here, they're a little bit small, but the first one is gift aid. Gift is a magic word. That's the one that we're all looking for. It's the piece of information that says, I don't owe anybody anything related to this money. Okay, it's a check that you get handed or a discount off your tuition, and you don't have to pay that back. That's the aid that we are all looking for. Okay, we're hoping to see a lot of gift aid. Another thing that you'll maybe see on your financial aid offers, and we'll take a look at a couple financial aid offer letters later on, but is a program called Work Study. This is often a federal program. There might be some qualifying factors to get offered this, but it's a nice way to offset some costs, not major costs frequently, but it's going to be usually a couple $1,000s you can earn over the course of working a couple hours a week, maybe at the front desk of your dorm. Information about, like my wife, for example, worked at the study abroad office and really had a good time. She studied abroad, so had some good connections, but got paid to do that worked with their schedule. It also encompasses work that maybe students are doing while they're in high school. Okay, so working in high school is a very valuable way to contribute to future studies. Okay, Some students work to support their families. Other students maybe work to support their lifestyle or their interests. And finding a way to balance that is a family decision, but it's a good way to allow your student to also have a little bit of skin in the game in relation to preparing for college or studying after high school. Family contribution, we're kind of going from great to worst, in my opinion. Family contribution is the money that's kind of the down payment. When we think about this whole big picture, this student aid index, or how much your family is expected to kind of contribute to education, is kind of your down payment on your car or your house. It's how much you're just going to have to pony up. And that's variable based on how much or how little your family makes in a given year. And then finally, probably the bad word that most people don't like seeing in relation to getting money for college, that's the loan word, right? And there's various types of loans that students get offered. And loans have become a little bit demonized, I think, in media, in the sense that loans are not always bad. Okay? They are often what actually makes school accessible for students. It's things that make sometimes the increasing and high costs of college palpable for families and able to take on. It's the extreme cases that oftentimes are the ones that we don't really like to swallow. You see the $250,000, $300,000 for your history degree from NYU. That might not be where the money's best spent. Okay. Over here, you'll see a couple on my slides. You'll see a couple little call outs. I probably won't speak too much to them, but just give them a read. But this one, for example, financial aid, when I ask and talk to families about applying for money to help support school, one of the big things that people say is, oh, well, we make too much money. We won't qualify for financial aid. Why would we fill this form out? Okay? And there are truths to that, but there are also myths to that. The truths might be that you might not qualify for certain types of financial aid, but the myths are that there are many financial aid opportunities for families of all income brackets that allow students to earn money, and a lot of them are merit-based, maybe based on your GPA, test scores, athletics, academics, other areas of kind of like prowess or things that you can demonstrate that you're good at things to a college. One of the main things that we have to kind of start recognizing and understanding a little bit about college, because we're starting at the beginning, is how colleges actually price themselves. How do they determine how much a college actually will cost you? And so every college in the United States is required to have and publish their average cost of attendance. And that kind of cost of attendance, sometimes you'll see it, there's a lot of acronyms in college and financial aid. That's called COA. If you see that word, that means cost of attendance. And it's always going to be an average, which if you know anything about averages, like that means it could be higher, it could be lower, depending on how you, like how much food you eat, or how, like, do you have 3 roommates or 1? So that cost of attendance is made up of a couple things. The big ones that we all think about, tuition and fees, how much school and being a student here costs. Room and board, that's essentially how much you cost to exist. Rent, food, utilities, basic things like that. Books and supplies, which is not free in college, as many of you are aware. It's very expensive in college, but it's something that is factored into this cost of attendance. Transportation, so this is a rough estimate. If it's going to look a lot different if you're from Tahoe and you move to Boston versus if you're from Tahoe and move to Sacramento. Okay, the cost is going to be variable, and they're going to give you an average. So the Boston scenario, you're probably going to have to pay a lot more for those plane tickets and traveling back and things like that versus a couple gas tanks up and down the hill. And then personal expenses, they do a lot for a little bit of your typical, like people need a new computer sometimes. They might need to buy a new pair of pants. Those things are, you get a small kind of allowance in relation to personal expenses, okay? One of the things that we also kind of have issues with too is this idea of sticker price. And very similar to buying a car or even a house, you don't necessarily walk in and negotiate financial aid. However, there are some avenues potentially to explore. But what you actually pay out the door is often not the price that you see listed on the cost of attendance. That cost of attendance is generally like, this is a cash all-in, like full pay scenario. The net price is actually what you will pay following submitting the different financial aid forms, reviewing the financial aid offers, and determining, the college will tell you how much it will actually cost you at the end. The hard part about how we do this in the United States is we spend a lot of time with you, and you spend a lot of time at home thinking about what types of colleges you maybe want to have on your list, roughly guesstimating how much college costs. And you don't actually figure out how much it actually is going to cost until you get in and do all the hard work and get accepted. and then we figure out how much it's actually going to cost to get us there. Okay, so part of what we're going to do tonight is actually show you a couple tools that you can start some basic estimates around. Okay, there's a lot of really great resources online. One of the main ones is a net price calculator that all colleges will have, and some have some better ones than others. So we'll take a look at a couple of those a little bit later this evening. But your net price is that cost of attendance minus your grants and scholarships, the stuff that you're trying to earn through your performance. Okay, and that's going to be your need or the remaining amount of money that you're trying to target. Once again, they kind of take that cost of attendance minus your student aid index, which is a result of the FAFSA, which we'll talk about briefly here in a second. This is a federal form that you all should plan on doing. California says it's a loose requirement, but it is something that we want to encourage families to do. But that's how they know how much you can afford to pay for school. So they find this financial need, and then their job as a college, their financial aid office, is to determine what pools of money do they have to access to help you get there. And sometimes they do a really great job. Sometimes they give you a pretty stellar financial aid award offer. And other times they are maybe unable to meet what they call a gap. This is a need that's left unmet. And this is something that you have to kind of be aware of, is that need that's left unmet, that gap, it just doesn't go away. It's often, if you end up going to that school, that's usually where you find scenarios where that $200,000, $300,000 history degree for an undergraduate degree you see in the news. They probably took a large amount of student debt because they got gapped by this school. So a simple, very simple, simplistic calculation of how need is calculated is this cost of attendance. So say a school, and this is maybe an out-of-state public or more typically a private school number, right? You look at that number, you're like, oh my gosh, and that's for at least years. But that's all in, that's that average cost of attendance with everything under the sun included. They maybe say, like an average family, say you have a student aid index of $20,000 a year. That's your down payment. That's what they say. You as a family with your savings, your income, should be able to foot the bill. Sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. Sometimes it's really not accurate. It's a not super flawless system. It doesn't take into account everything, but that's what the schools get from the FAFSA or the California Dream Act. And then they figure out, okay, you have $55,000 left that we now as a college have to figure out how to provide. And we're going to put together a list of different ways to do that, made up of different types of aid, gift aid, loans, work study, grants potentially, that will help offset that cost. The goal for both us as students and families, but also the colleges, is to get that $55,000 down to zero. That's their goal. And colleges want to do that too. Okay, I don't want to make colleges the bad guy because they're so expensive. They are really legitimately trying to help, and they look for ways and are creative in how to figure out how to reduce this overall financial need. Okay, so once again, gift aid, scholarships are oftentimes one of the things, and gift aid usually is broken into two areas. Okay, grants are usually need-based, meaning they are determined by how much or how little you have as a family, where usually words like scholarship have some level of merit associated with them. There's some sort of metric that you usually have to meet to be eligible for this type of money, and often it's somewhat limited in terms of maybe the availability, where grants are usually offered through the institution, the federal or state level governments. We talked a little about work study. Loans come in two primary buckets. And like I said, loans are, if we can avoid loans, awesome. Most students can't. And that's not bad either, as long as we do it wisely. The two main buckets of loans, which there are sub-buckets too, but the federal student loan program is the main one where students will get offered from either the state or the federal government most typically. And they come in either subsidized or unsubsidized types. Subsidized means the government will pay your interest as you go through school, typically until about 6 months after you graduate. And then you start picking up repayments. Okay, that is, if you need to take out loans, that is the first one to take out. Those are the primary loans to focus on. In that same bucket of federal student loans, you have unsubsidized, which is the opposite of subsidized, that your interest starts accruing as soon as you get that money from the government. Meaning like your $10,000 loan you take out as a freshman will probably be more like a $13,000 or $14,000 loan by the time you graduate. Okay, so you want to aim for some of the money that covers its own self while you're in school. And that often includes while you're in graduate school too. Okay, so if you're in a long-term education program, keep that in mind. The parent loans, we'll dive into a little bit more in the second half as well. But that's going to be a loan that's taken out in the parent's name or guardian's name. And that's one that's a little tricky. It's a little bit more complicated and complex. It has some like credit elements to it as well. So it's one that gets offered sometimes to families, but it's one to be a little careful with navigating. Okay. And then savings. In the second half, we'll also talk a little bit about 529s. We'll talk about maybe setting some stuff aside. Seniors, like it will not likely impact your financial aid offers this coming year. But again, this is an annual thing. So in another year or two, anything that you make changes to now would potentially catch up maybe later on in college. So how do we access some of these dollars? How do we get these offers that colleges want to give people? There's 3 main applications, and you're not going to likely do all 3. You shouldn't do all 3. Okay, you may do 2. Okay, and some may only do 1. So the primary one, kind of going from right to left on the top, is the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is a federal government form that, thank God, has become easier this year. This year is like one of the first years in the last couple of years that it's been relatively smooth going. There's been a huge number of hiccups as they made some changes, but this year so far, we've mainly heard decent things. Seniors, if you've done it, have you done it, Sophia? Yeah, it was not too bad. Some of the differences to their kind of like California counterpart, which is called the California Dream Act application, or CATA. This application is similar to the FAFSA, meaning it's going to determine your need. It takes a lot of the same information that you would provide to the FAFSA. The primary differences between these 2 applications is the FAFSA, the federal form, is only eligible to students who are US citizens or eligible non-citizen categories. Meaning, if a student is undocumented in California, going to school and planning to go to college, they will not be eligible to submit a FAFSA form through the federal government. That's a federal law. It's a complicated thing, but that's the rules, and that's how it works. Parent or contributor documentation in relation to the FAFSA does not matter. Okay, the parent or guardian who's submitting the information on behalf of the student, they can be undocumented. If the student is documented, they would still file this FAFSA form. The California Dream Act application is a form where the student is undocumented and the parent may or may not be, but the student will not have status in the United States. And so while the federal government does not recognize that, California does. Okay, so this California Dream Act application permits students to qualify for a couple of state-based programs like in-state tuition, Cal Grant programs, some of the different Chaffee grants, and different levels of the different Cal Grant programs and blue and gold scholarships, and kind of the stuff that is distributed from California institutional programs. Okay, so that's an important distinction. Just surveying. Which one do students who are undocumented fill out? Right or left? That way, correct. California Dream Act. How about documented parents? Usually it's gonna be this one, because if the parent's documented, very often the student is as well. Okay, so the third one at the bottom is a little bit different, and that's called the CSS profile. This is more one to be aware of. Okay, this is one to be kind of just like, I've heard of that. I kind of know that I should probably look for that term when I'm looking at financial aid information. This is a separate form. This is not a government form. This is a form through the College Board, which is the lovely nonprofit who does all the SATs and APs and all those different testing things. They offer this program too. And what this does is there's about 250, usually very expensive, very selective, or both, schools out there that require additional information to offer financial aid beyond what the FAFSA provides. So they require this form to get filled out as well. A couple things that does to be aware of as we look at these 3 options. The FAFSA, my kind of way to describe these 2 different applications, the FAFSA is kind of your real estate agent or realtor walking around your house, kind of like checking out curb appeal, seeing how much they could potentially sell your house for in the given market. they give you a rough estimate. Okay, the CSS profile is like the home inspector coming through. They're going to look under the carpets, they're going to look in the walls, they're going to check for things. They're also going to consider a lot more and different types of assets, in addition to custodial and non-custodial parent income and assets, potentially. Okay, so sometimes it gets a little bit tricky and often is much more complex and in-depth. So we kind of covered a couple of these things. The main things here are just making sure that you know when you're going to be filling some of these different applications out. Excuse me. So the FAFSA and the California DREAM Act, if everything rolls out as planned every year, they get released October 1st. Okay, so they become available October 1st. It actually was a little bit early this year. And then in California, their primary deadline, their priority deadline is March 2nd. Okay, so they have a large window of time to complete this, and this is done during the senior year. Okay, and then any year after that, you're in college. Okay, you're not, if you're a freshman in here, you're here for information, you're not filing the FAFSA. You're gonna waste time. Okay, it's not useful until your senior year. The California DREAM Act has that same window. If you're applying to out-of-state schools, the general rule of thumb is really kind of as soon as reasonable is when they want those financial aid applications in. Oftentimes, my target that I tell seniors is like Thanksgiving is a really good area, or like early December is a pretty decent target to aim for. Usually college applications are starting to wrap up. If it's pretty smooth like it has been, it really shouldn't, like, we're hoping seniors can get start to finish done in the second half of our conversation tonight. Like, it shouldn't take you too long. I've heard about 20 or 30 minutes on average. Okay, so this is some of the information that you might need to have handy when you're ready to fill that out. In addition, there's one additional item called the FSA ID, which is kind of your federal ID that you'll be working on applying to while you're going through this process. So that's just another term to be aware of. So there are a couple options outside of even just the FAFSA, and some of these you access through the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act. But one of the ways that also makes attending college more affordable for families as well. Say you get a financial aid letter and you have a large gap and it's not reasonable to actually go to this particular school for 4 years. The community college system in California provides a really great on-ramp to reduce the overall college costs. There are programs in California, for example, many of the colleges call it the Promise program or something similar, that they will offer students basically no tuition, and you're responsible basically for your living expenses as long as you're meeting certain metrics or points. We have great partners here tonight with LTCC who are going to help some of our seniors, and so they have a lot of information they can also share. But it's a really great way to reduce costs, and community college is a great pathway to any degree program that you're aiming for. So I would encourage families, if cost is a concern, this is one really great way to consider reducing that. The Cal Grant program in California is primarily geared towards all levels technically through the community college, CSUs, and UCs. But there are different levels of award components that students can qualify for depending on things like GPA, the type of school that you're attending. Sometimes levels of family income can put you in a certain bracket to qualify for certain awards. And so that is a program that is generally open to all students as long as, again, you file one of those 2 applications, and you're typically automatically considered for that when you apply to those types of schools. The last one on the far right is something that it's called the WUI, or Western Undergraduate Exchange. That is something just to, again, one of those be aware of things. This doesn't really apply for us as California residents coming into California, so you wouldn't be getting the WUI going to like Sac State. But if you were looking at schools like Utah or Montana State or places like that, you might qualify for this thing called the WUI. And ultimately what it does is they're relatively high, sometimes not even higher than in-state California tuition, and they split it between their in-state and out-of-state numbers, right? So it basically gets you a 50% discount on the difference between how much in-state or out-of-state costs, okay? Different schools use this different ways. Some of them have like a limited pool. Others have things that maybe you have to show metrics for, so maybe it's a certain GPA. Sometimes there are some test scores maybe related to it, like an SAT. But that's another term. You'll often see it called WUE. Actually, very rarely do you actually see the whole thing written out. Okay, that's another thing to be aware of as you're looking at colleges. So how does this all work in terms of when this stuff happens? So in ninth grade, so if we have ninth graders in here, or even eighth graders, ninth grade is all about building that foundation. Okay, so one of the best ways to actually improve your opportunity for financial aid is actually do your best work as a student. Okay, a lot of financial aid awards that are merit-based start or are heavily swayed by academics. Okay, so your grades, your GPA, maybe your test scores might be associated. And the best way to prepare for those and be in the best position is actually do really well in school. Tracking involvement also is helpful. Getting involved in ninth grade is one of the things we talk often about, is joining a club, joining a sport. Those things not only create opportunities for maybe some additional scholarships, but it also allows you to develop a resume that people who are awarding scholarships want to give you money for. Okay, so there might be certain things that are for a football team player or someone who's part of the chess club. Okay, and so those types of things, if you're involved in, you might become eligible for some additional aid and funding sources. And in ninth grade, the other thing that's kind of starting to kind of trickle down is you don't need to feel like pull out your tax information or like look at your W-2s together. Like, let's start having some conversations with ninth graders and start normalizing a little bit the talk about money in your family. I know that's sometimes hard. It's something that we as adults struggle with, but kids also have no idea what that means in many cases. Like, they don't know, like, sometimes they just go and I want that thing, and then it just shows up. Like, they don't know how much it costs or how much you earn or things like that. So start normalizing a little bit of those conversations, because it will make the transition to talking about money related to college smoother as you get older. Okay, as they approach the time when they're filling out those applications and also getting the money back, when it comes back and it's too expensive, it's not quite as of a shocker. It's still disappointing, but they know the background and where they're coming from in terms of how they're getting to that dollar and cents line. In 10th and 11th grade, we start getting a little bit more realistic and focused. Okay, in a little bit, we'll dive into like some net price calculators that will show you how to actually estimate how much things cost. Start taking those college tours. A lot of times on college tours, they will give you some information about their average amount of student aid that they award. They might go over the cost of attendance with you potentially. Those are great questions to start asking as well. So if you're touring around over winter break or spring break or over the summer, bring some financial aid questions potentially with you to start asking some of those detailed pieces. Like I said, filing habits in 529. If you don't file taxes, that's a big one. Okay, so make sure you're filing taxes. It's kind of like a bank many times. Like, if you put into the bank, you can kind of withdraw from the bank. If you don't put into the bank, sometimes you can't withdraw some or all money that might be available to you. So that's a big thing to just keep, making sure that if you're in that younger phase, you're still great. Make sure that you get caught up on that stuff. And then 11th grade is that preparation. The academic and the college research phase of 11th grade, you're usually looking at and refining lists of schools. So you're building out, where do I want to go? What schools fit my needs and wants, my academic profile? Part of that conversation also has to be, what schools potentially meet our family's financial profile? Okay, and that's where those conversations that lead up there will be helpful. They have an idea of how much this might cost or how much we've set aside potentially to put towards college. Towards the end of 11th grade, students can start gathering documentation. Realistically, nowadays, if things stay roughly the same, there's actually not even that much paper documentation you don't even need to have. Most people don't even need their tax papers. It connects directly to the IRS and makes it relatively simple. Okay, but they can also start creating resumes, get ready to apply for scholarship applications, which most typically happen during their senior year. Then 12th grade is when you actually submit those applications. That's that first year of actually doing, much like most of the other process with college. Most of the time you're filing out your application, you're going to be completing those different documents, doing your scholarship applications, getting the results back, making decisions. And then financial aid, when we're looking at all this information, an important thing to keep in mind is this is an annual thing. When you get that cost of attendance, that $75,000 cost of attendance, that's not for your degree. That's for 1 year. Okay, so we're multiplying these costs of attendance, we're multiplying these financial aid offers and awards by at least 4 at a 4-year college, if not potentially 5. Some schools, the degree path is stretched into 4.5 or 5 years, and those extra years are not free. They still come at a cost. Okay. So that's kind of a big picture overview of kind of how we get there. So a couple things that are going to be important to stand out is making sure that you're paying attention to deadlines. When we're talking about financial aid deadlines, those are hard deadlines, just like every other college deadline. If it says March 2nd at 11:59 p.m., if you turn it in March 3rd at 12:01 a.m., you probably just lost a whole bunch of money. Okay, so those deadlines are super, super crucial, which is why kind of preparing early and filing earlier on in a window is helpful. We talked about most of the things. A lot of times, the thing I'll mention about this last one about local scholarships are a very frequent question that we get. How and when and where do we apply for scholarships? The main source of money comes from 3 or 4 places. So the first one is going to be the school itself. Okay, that's going to be some of those institutional grants, maybe a college scholarship that you might get. The second one will probably come from your state. Okay, so for California, that will probably be like a Cal grant, for example. And then the fourth one is oftentimes the federal government. Maybe you qualify for a Pell Grant, federal work study. And then the last one is oftentimes yourself, your family. Those are the primary places. Many of the scholarships that you get are not usually too large. Usually scholarships that a typical student gets are going to be more in the kind of like couple $1,000 range, which are great. Like, don't get me wrong, those are awesome. But oftentimes it's not the full ride, not the $60,000 or $70,000 scholarship, kind of the flagship ones that most people think of. So banking on that is not necessarily a good idea, but it's something that applying for scholarships is useful, but you have to look at your return on your investment. Okay, students who apply for scholarships here, primarily at our school, go through a local scholarship organization, the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, and they have a centralized application that happens during their senior year. In another couple weeks for seniors, it'll open up. Regionally, there are some scholarships you might consider as well. However, when you look earlier on, high school, junior, sophomore, even year, you're going to be applying mainly for national-based scholarships. They're these large, I call them sweepstakes. They're less. There's a lot of applicants for very few awards most often, and so sometimes you're going to actually make more money and leave better off by like working a summer job instead of doing scholarship applications, working on a resume that will help you with more likely pools of money. And if your kid's bored, awesome. Be careful, don't put in a bunch of private information. However, it's like the Dr. Pepper field goal. Like you kick a field goal, win $1 million. Sometimes it's like that. Okay, so there are some great tools out there, but if you want them to leave with dollars in hand, probably the fastest avenue to doing that is getting a job. That's the fastest way, and then teaching them how to save. It not only gives them resume booster, teaches them good money management skills, and like it puts their skin in the game. A couple key websites that I want you just to kind of maybe bookmark or write down. So the Federal Financial Aid website, that's the primary avenue to get onto the FAFSA document. And so that's going to be where students would be finding information out about filing the FAFSA, as well as like loan disbursement, all the fun stuff that comes along with it, as well as kind of like managing your FSA ID, doing some research. There's some good information on there that I would encourage you to explore. California-specific resources, the California Student Aid Commission, the CSAC website, that second one there, they're the ones that manage our local, or not local, but our state level awards, so your Cal grants, programs like that. That's also where students would access the California DREAM Act application. Okay, so that's the 2 access portals for those 2 applications. We'll look at some net price calculators, but they are available on essentially every college website. So if you type in name of college, net price in Google or whatever search engine you use, it'll pop right up for you, and you can work through filling that information out. Big Future is that's through the College Board. Niche, FastWeb, some of those are some great scholarship aggregate search tools. And then we also provide a lot of information through events like this. We're available to kind of consult or answer questions or support students as they navigate through things. If you really want a lot of support, you can join Ms. Barker's CCR class. We have a class in senior year in particular that's really kind of like walk students through the entire process of applying to college, applying for financial aid, reviewing applications, getting a lot of scholarship money, celebrations, all that stuff. Let's see. We're going to skip over this. I covered that. So at this point, I'm going to take a timeout because I'm going to pause this for this session. This kind of sets the stage for our next conversation. But we're going to take about a 5-minute break. If you need to use the restroom, that's great. If you are a senior, you would like help with filing your FAFSA or your California DREAM Act, which most people, probably seniors, would probably be a good idea. Okay. This next section is primarily geared towards students in 9th, 10th, 11th grade. Okay, because you're kind of past that phase. But if you're ready and you have like your information and you want to go get some support, we have a lot of really great help upstairs in Miss Barker's room and Miss Drosky's room. Okay, so you can, if your families are here, great. If not, follow the group of folks or Miss Barker in the back, and she can go guide you to getting some of that help with the financial aid component. Like I said, we'll take about 3 or 4 minute break, and then we'll be right back up here. I'll switch the recording up and we'll dive into the second half, which will dig a little deeper into the specifics of what we're talking about. Oh yeah, there's pizza if you're hungry. We know it's dinner time. Grab a piece and bring it back, and we can. That'll make the second half a lot more fun. Yes, we do have translation, and there's specific support in Spanish and in English available for the senior session. Ms. Barker's class 217. Upstairs and that way. You'll follow most of the people going upstairs if that's you. If you're not, you can hang out.
For Ms. Barker, no, it's for 11th grade now.
No, it's going to be actively filling out the FAFSA up there. 11th grade, this is probably where you're going to be for 11th grade.
Can I ask you a really specific question about...
Give me 1 second. Let me stop this and then definitely. There we go.